Before we jump to conclusions, it is important to understand what kind of man Admiral Byrd was. Richard Byrd is one of the most respected officers in history. Naval officer, aviator, explorer, first person to fly to the North and South Poles, recognized by everyone with the Medal of Honor, the highest military award in the United States. He was a true leader and kept detailed records of each of his journeys in his journal. He was neither a poet, nor an author, nor a storyteller, but a soldier. The idea that someone of this rank starts making up stories is unacceptable. According to the notes and stories of his colleagues, he lived honorably. He was aware of the responsibility for his words and choices regarding the lives of those who depended on him and, of course, the country he served. When he returned from his travels, he was interviewed live on television in 1954. What he says is quite mysterious, strange, and confusing to some extent. He says something like, "I want to see the country beyond the pole." He doesn't say to the pole, but beyond. He calls it the land of eternal mystery, the most peaceful place on the planet, a huge amount of territory that is not on any of the maps. As big as the USA, but hidden from people. And one more thing, the most valuable and important place on the planet for science. After his consecutive expedition in 1947, he says, "This is the most important expedition in the history of mankind," and what he repeats the most is, "This is the center of the great unknown." All this sounds extremely strange, considering that there are no such visible places on the planet. If we're talking about Antarctica and the ice, to call it a peaceful place with real peace, that is quite strange, military officer. As one of the highest ranking men in the military, he was of course sworn to keep many secrets. Maybe that's the reason for his weird way of expression. In February 1947, Byrd said, "I want to see the land beyond the pole, the center of the great unknown." Millions of people hear it on the radio and read it in the newspapers. But what is he talking about? If we look at the map, everything known is at most 320 kilometers away. And he said, even after 2,700 kilometers, they had not reached the end of this earth. He should have seen nothing but an ocean covered with ice, but instead he flew over whole kilometers full of green nature, mountains, lakes. It was published that he discovered two unknown zones with a distance of over 6,400 kilometers, but his story mysteriously disappears. Why is everything he talked about suddenly being suppressed? Praised as the world's greatest explorer, Admiral Byrd mentions that the new land has created great interest. After that, these statements disappeared instantly. Comments on his discoveries, all the news, as well as photos that Byrd showed soon disappeared from the public eye. Did Byrd really discover a new land? A discovery that could provide new information about the creation and development of our planet? Byrd was trying to say what he knew. It is clear that he knew something, but he tried to say it not quite clearly and directly. To add a little more to this mysterious case, in 1956, Flying Saucer magazine editor Ray Palmer wrote a detailed story about the Admiral's discoveries. Interestingly, just before it was published, almost all the copies disappear, and the few that are found are in poor condition, to say the least. About 20 years before the Operation High Jump, Richard Byrd attempted a flight over the North Pole. On 9th of May 1926, the famous American explorer took off from the Norwegian Arctic island of Svalbard with his pilot Floyd Bennett in an attempt to be the first to fly to the North Pole. About 4 hours later, the pair returned to the island in their Fokker Josephine Ford engine plane, claiming that they had indeed accomplished the attempt. Byrd turned over his navigational records to the US Navy, and a committee of the National Geographic Society, one of his sponsors, which confirmed the achievement according to the Ohio State University libraries. Byrd was hailed as hero, receiving the Medal of Honor, and went on to fly over to the South Pole as well as achieve many other milestones in polar exploration. But from 1926 on, not everyone thought Byrd and Bennett had actually reached the North Pole. The argument rested on whether the plane could have covered the distance in just 15 hours and 44 minutes, as them noted that the flight was expected to take about 18 hours, given the plane's ground speed. Numerous people have weighed in on the debate over the past 90 years, some accusing Byrd of fraud and others coming to support, all using different evidence, including Byrd's own records of the day. Byrd was accused of lying about being the first to fly over the North Pole. Even with his research casting doubt on Byrd, Newsom, a professor of astronomy at Ohio State, still expresses respect for Byrd's pioneering journey, which was made at a time when airplane navigation was much more difficult and dangerous, especially over the barren Arctic in an overfueled plane, intensely loud cockpit, and frostbite concerns. That they came back at all is a great achievement, and the fact that they got where they were supposed to go, it shows that Byrd knew how to navigate properly with his sun compass, Newsom says. But for Navy Admiral Byrd to lie about the expedition, about the people with him, about what he saw, about his entire diary, which we will look at it in a moment with detailed events by dates and times, this does not seem like an unusual act of a man of his status. Another thing he shared is that the poles are concave, not convex as they thought. It was documented that there was a large spike in temperature as they approached the pole, but one of Byrd's greatest mysteries may have occurred just after the end of World War II. On February 1st, 1947, the expedition called High Jump, scheduled for 8 months of work, arrived in Antarctica in the area of Queen Maud Land. Rear Admiral Byrd's expedition was considered strictly scientific, but it was funded by the US Navy. They went to Antarctica accompanied by the aircraft carrier Casablanca with 25 planes and 7 helicopters, on board a submarine, an icebreaker, and 12 tankers, on which there were 4,800 people. At that time, the official statement was that the expedition's main mission was to find coal and other resources. The story was later changed to military hands-on training, preparation, and establishment of an intelligence base. Meanwhile, we can't help but wonder, why did they need 32 planes, 13 ships, and nearly 5,000 people, many of whom die afterwards? It is later learned that the real purpose of the mission was to retrieve the missing Nazi leaders from their base in Antarctica. Large-scale work on aerial photography was carried out, a polar station was equipped, but then many strange messages appeared on the air. "They are attacking us, we're suffering heavy losses." It is known who Rear Admiral Byrd was at war with, but on March 3rd, 1947, all work was suddenly stopped and the expedition hurriedly returned to America. The materials from the expedition were immediately classified and nothing was reported about the reasons for the Admiral's escape from Antarctica. Secretary of the Navy James Forrestal began to speak. President Truman forced him to resign, and he was soon sent to a mental institution where he was confined to a windowless room and forbidden to speak to or see anyone, including his own wife. After some time, this very high-ranking man was found dead, and the case was ruled a suicide. If there was nothing, why would you be locked up in a clinic where you're forbidden to talk to anyone? Byrd spoke to a reporter for the Chilean newspaper El Mercurio, saying he didn't want to scare anyone but was adamant that if there was another war, the US would be attacked by flying objects that could fly from pole to pole at incredible speed. This is where this journal comes in. Shortly after Byrd's death, his son published a diary under the title The Missing Diary of Admiral Richard Byrd, revealing a completely different point of view than the official information. But do we actually have a proof that the Earth is hollow and many civilizations live there?